Here are the tools required for the JHM solid short throw shifter install. First off, a pair of snap ring pliers to install the shifter into the plastic base. We also have a 1/4 inch drive ratchet. You can use a 3/8 drive ratchet with everything, but I prefer 1/4 inch for the size. And I also run with a 1/4 inch 8mm socket. For the ashtray, a T25 Torx to undo the shifter base from the shifter box. You can also use a regular little Torx key for that. I also have an extension here. This is not required, but this will make it a lot easier, this long of an extension. A couple inches long should probably work with this, but I prefer the longer extension. It keeps me from hitting stuff on the interior. I also have a flat blade screwdriver for installing the new clamp on the shift knob. Have a 3/8 drive ratchet. I like this small little swiveling type. Just makes it easier to fit in the palm of my hand. You can use a regular ratchet as well. And last but not least, I have a 6mm Allen bit attached to a long extension. You probably don't need an extension that long, but once again, it helps get in there to adjust your shifter and install the bolts. You could also try a regular Allen key, but that will be difficult. And I also have a vice grip. You could probably use any regular pliers as well. This is something I'm going to need to do to clearance access to one of the bolts under the dust boot. We are now ready to begin the installation of the JHM solid short throw shifter. First, I'm going to start with disassembly. On a side note, we already have the JHM solid short throw shifter in this car, so be aware of that. It's not going to look the same as your stock shifter or your other aftermarket short throw, but it will come out the same way, so it's not really going to matter. First thing you need to do, snap up the boot. And what you're going to find on this from the factory is this little clamp right here. It's like a CV boot clamp. It's clamped on, so it's really hard to get off. If you could see, I bent this one up pretty bad to get it off. You usually have to get up in here pretty good and pry it. So this one's already off, so that I'm going to skip that step. So once that clamps off, your shifter knob just slides right off. Next, we got to worry about all these soundproof boots. We got this round one. This other piece of foam right up here in the front. You may want to lay it out the way it came out, just to help you out on reassembly. And last but not least, we got this larger one. This one's kind of fun to put back in because it's so long right here. One other thing I did leave out, you do need a 10mm socket to undo these two dust boot bolts. So next we need to get the ashtray out. Get this out of here. Going to now undo the ashtray. Two 8mm bolts. So now we got to get the shifter assembly out of the car so we can change the bushings and the shifter. So the first thing we're going to want to do to aid in removal is undo this bolt here that holds the shifter base to the shift rod. It's that 6mm. Make sure you get a good connection in there. You don't want to strip it out. This is where removal of the ashtray would help, but if you get a long extension like I'm doing here, it's not a big deal. Then we got to get way down here, the one that hooks the linkage rod to the shifter. This is your adjustment as well. Once it's undone, you can kind of pull it back. Gets in there and makes it a little easier. We are now ready to remove the actual assembly from the car. So what we got to get is there's a Torx bit here, 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 and here, the T25. get the easy ones first. The ones in the back, pretty easy to get to. You may actually want to slide the shifter forward. It's a little more difficult why the long extension comes in handy, the right front one. If you're worried about losing the bolts as well, you can get a pair of needle nose and pluck them out that way as well. You'll notice this portion, it's bent a little bit. I use this to help install the shifter. If you look at this, it's just foam. It's a foam boot, just moving with the shifter. It's not a big deal. So that's what's sealing right here. So I just bend this back a little bit, because the only other option is to undo the two 10mm bolts here, and there's two way up under here. And I don't know about you, but I'm okay not doing those. So I don't mind bending this and bending it back. It's just more of a, it's just a dust boot, so it's not going to cause an issue with your car. So now I got to bend it. That's where the little vice grips come in handy. You can use probably any kind of other wrench on hand. Give it a good little flex. Get it out of the way. This is where you could probably use a regular Torx key and get to it without bending it, but I guess I'm lazy. So we'll get that. Now the shifter's ready to be removed. You gotta kind of wiggle it, get it off this shift rod. Don't forget to remove this piece once you've gotten the bolt out as well. So now the shifter's out. This, once again, is a JHM unit, so yours is going to be the stock unit. I will now move on to the bench assembly of the shifter. You will see in the bench assembly that it's a B6-B7 shifter. It's the same process to replace, so just ignore the fact that it has a spring on it for the push-down reverse. Now that we have the shifter assembly out of the car, I'm now going to start with the disassembly of the factory shifter. First thing you want to do is undo this external snap ring up here where the spring is located. You may want to hold on to this a little bit when you remove the snap ring, because you may shoot off and you do not want that. As the snap ring's off, the shaft easily slips out. Put that to the side. The last major chore is to pop the large snap ring out. We will retain this piece for use with our kit. Everything else can be discarded. This just slips right out. Be set to the side. While this is apart, we can replace these bushings here with the supplied Delrin also. When you receive your JHM solid short throw shifter, you'll come in a box like this. In the package you will find a tube of grease, 2 Delrin bushings. If you notice, they're cut in half and they come with supplied snap rings. You got to be very careful to make sure that the two halves stay together. They need to be kept as a unit because they are cut together. And then a package full of shims. Pull the shifter out of the box. Got to remove the bubble wrap. And you will find that the shifter is fully assembled. To begin with the actual assembly, it's going to be easier to switch out the rubber bushings with our Delrin bushings when the shifter assembly is out of the base. How this is done, you actually got to go ahead and wiggle these out. You got to pull pretty hard and wiggle. Sometimes the bushing will stay with the piece, sometimes it'll stay with the rod. Bushing can be discarded. You now need to get out one of the Delrin bushings and snap ring. On a side note, it's easier to do one side at a time so you don't get anything mixed up or put these rods in backwards. You have a reference by looking at the other rod. So for the assembly, we're going to take our tube of grease, hold 1/2 of the Delrin bushing, put some grease in it, take the other half of the Delrin bushing, some grease in it. What you need to do next is you sandwich these bushings over the shaft with the shouldered end near here. To squeeze them together. Going to get a little messy, but it's good. We want to make sure these are plenty lubricated. Then slide everything into the base. At this point, we take our snap ring. We need to snap it into the grooves in order to keep the Delrin bushing in place. Now that we have the snap ring neatly installed, we are done with this one side. The shaft should be sliding easily. Make sure there's plenty of lubrication. Then move on to the other side. Now that we have finished assembling and installing our Delrin bushings into the base, we will now install the shaft. Our shaft assembly will come fully assembled. All you need to do is insert it into the base. Before you doing so, you need to put some grease, especially on this notch, because this is what it rides on to grab reverse. You may also want to put some grease down here near the base. Just kind of rub it inside the joints. Work it in a little bit. That should do it. Now here's the tricky part. You need to get this through the base. You can do it if you take your time and angle it properly. Worst case, you may have to remove the bottom pivot piece, the bolt right here, to get it through. But if you take your time and you twist it sideways like this, it will go through. Next task, just snap this into place, our aluminum base. Just drops right in. Now that is in, we need to snap this down with a snap ring. We don't just snap the snap ring in, we actually supply some shims. The reason we supply shims is this is a precision fit piece. So we've machined it to basically use one shim. There's the thick shim in here, 1 millimeter thick. That is the shim you should use. There are 4 thicknesses though. This is just in case that the tolerances of your base are different than the ones we have installed this into so far. We just have taken this into account, being that this is a precision piece. So you drop the thick one in here. Before you stick it in there, you want to make sure that the aluminum base is seated fully at the bottom with the plastic and is flush. So now that we got our shim in there, we just install the snap ring. This is where the other shims come into play. If you put the snap ring in and you can't get it in at all, that means we need to run thinner shims. You want it shim just right where it's a very tight fit and the base will not move inside of the plastic unit. Now the assembly is ready to be installed into the car. A little side note on these shims. It should work fine with the thickest shim. However, if it's too tight and you cannot get the thick shim in there are thinner shims. Try to use as many as you can, making it as tight as possible. If you run our thick shim and it's loose, then you want to add some of these on top of it. The bottom line is you need to adjust this so it's a really tight fit on the snap ring and the snap ring barely goes in. This will help retain the features of the JHM solid short throw. Now we're ready for installation. If you also look here, the bolt on the bottom is the 25% reduction and the top bolt hole is 5% reduction if you don't like the reduction of our shifter. So now I'm going to reassemble it. This is a little trickier being that we got these stiffer bushings in here. So I'm going to have to fiddle with this a little bit to get it onto the shift rods and everything. First rod you want to slip it into is the one that hooks the actual shifter rail to the main rod, and then you're going to want to get that welded piece I pointed out earlier up around the shifter. So actually easier with this all the way back to get this on there for the shifter adjustment. And and if you don't bolt it down either, it's going to make it a lot easier. You're going to have to play with where this is at and the angle down here. It's kind of a crooked angle. It's difficult to get to. Sometimes once you get it in the hole and get it started a little bit, you may be able to spin it. You can take the bit off and actually go down here, and it gives you a little more height to spin the bolt and get it started. Now once you get it started by hand, you're going to want to get in here with your extension. You want to get it a little bit more. What you can do to aid the installation, you can actually pull the shifter all the way back into 4th gear. This gives you a little more room. It's a little more straight up and down. You're actually going to want to tighten it all the way. And once it's tightened all the way, just back it off a little bit, so now it'll move. So now you can once again, you could push it up back into 3rd. Now you need to position these slide rods that the Delrin bushings ride on. They'll line up all the holes here. This is where the Torx bolts go back in. I kind of put them in. What I do is I hold them with one finger like that, and I guide them into place. If that doesn't work for you, once again I said you can use needle nose to drop them in. You just want to get them all started first. Front ones, once again, are a little more difficult. So now, get this last one in here. I'm all tightened up. Now that all the Torx bolts are tightened up, you now need to move on to the rest of the linkage. We did put that in earlier, so make sure it's loose enough so the shifter moves freely. Now we need to move towards the stabilizer rod that hooks the actual transmission to the shifter. So I'm going to push that forward. A little fun to get up in here, but it's not too bad. What you'll notice with this is the factory install on the opening right here was about center. You can actually scoot it a little bit towards the rear just to bring the shifter a little closer to you. I like about a 1/4 inch gap on the front leading edge, and it's usually enough room near the back for the shifter to slide back and forth with the transmission. So next you want to tighten that one. This one's a little more difficult if you leave the ashtray in. We now want to tighten this front bolt. It's a little more difficult with the ashtray in, but not too bad. Get a straight shot on it. Careful of your nav unit. Got one nice and tight. Now we're ready to adjust the shifter. So first, like I said before, you want to make sure it moves freely. Make sure it's in neutral. Now we're ready to move on to the shifter adjustment. You want to make sure it's in neutral. So you should be able to go side to side even though it's loose right now. You should be able to make sure you can go forward a gear, and you can go backwards a gear as well, just to kind of make sure you find neutral. Should sit about in the center. So what you're going to do, since this is just a 5-speed and it's not a major concern, just want to get this thing pretty much straight up and down. Get it nice and centered on here. So just get the bearing nice and centered. And without moving it much, You need to tighten this adjustment bolt. It'll move a little bit. Take your time. Luckily this is not as critical as the 6-speed car. So now you get it nice and snug, not too bad yet. And you want to check the gears. And what you're looking for is the clearance down here on the bearing right here versus the front. So just kind of peek in there and see if it looks about the same amount on each side. Same with first and second. This one's leaning a little bit more to the front, but shove it pretty good. Make sure you don't hit the edge of the bearing. If that's the case, you should be okay. It looks like we got good clearance. Another thing you're going to notice, it's going to hit the edge of the plastic, which is, you're going to feel it now because we got the Delrin bushings, so more solid. So that's it. Make sure it's centered up. Make sure you got the same clearance on all sides. Make sure you can get first, second, fifth, and reverse. So it's in there now. So now we just got to put the little things back. So what we want to work on is getting this bent back. Not a big deal. It's just a dust shield, just foam. So just kind of bend it a little bit. If it's bugging you, you live in a rust belt somewhere where it snows a lot, you may want to just squirt a little bit of paint on there or push it on there with a little brush. But luckily I'm out here in California. Or some WD-40, just something to protect it a little bit. Now that I got this nice, decently straight bent back, we're ready for the dust boot. Once again, it's just foam, no big deal. So we're going to slip this in, arrow forward. Just lift your ashtray up a little bit. Then on there. Put on your two 10mm nuts. Tighten them up. Now one of the fun parts, getting all these shift boots in. This one, once again, is going to go like this. It's kind of fun to get this large piece in here. Just have to play with it. It's just a sound deadener, so it's not mission critical. It's perfect. You also have this ledge that you want to shove off to the side. Once it's in, you want it pretty close to being on center. There we go. This little arm over here gets to be a pain. So get it on center. Get it so it wants to stay in place. We're not going to reinsert the foam yet, or this boot. What you want to do is you're going to want to put the ashtray in first. So what you got to do is just get it in position. Once the ashtray's in position, it should get flush right here. Drop our bolts in. Like I did, I put it in fourth to help give you some clearance. Now we're ready for this foam. Rips kind of easy, so be careful with it. And that way you can see exactly how it fits into place. And our last little washer. Now we're nice and quiet. The ashtray back. Now we need to worry about putting the shifter on. We just supply a little hose clamp. So what you're going to do is you're going to want to put the hose clamp on, put this on, then tighten it up. drops into these grooves right here. If this bothers you at all, rubbing on your boot, you can't notice it, just wrap it with some tape to keep it from rubbing through the leather when you're done. You could also try to reuse the factory one, but I don't like struggling. You would need a CV boot tool to do that. So we push this all the way down, slip the clamp up, you'll feel it drop into its place, and just tighten it up. Now your shifter knob's on the car, not coming off. We need to stick our boot back on. Some of these clips are fun to line back up. And just pull your boot down. There you go. Ready for your test drive. And that's it.